Garneau is Associate Professor of Visual Arts at the University of Regina. His practice includes painting, drawing, curation, and critical writing. He is most interested in the collision of nature and culture, metaphysics, and materialism in the contemporary Indigenous identities. He has curated several large group exhibitions, two-person exhibitions, and solo shows. Garneau has written numerous catalog essays and reviews and was a co-founder and co-editor of the Artichoke and Cameo magazines. Garneau is currently working on curatorial and writing projects featuring contemporary Indigenous art and curatorial exchanges between Canada and Australia, and is part of a 5-year shared-funded curatorial research project called Creative Conciliation. And as maybe my own plug, if that's okay, David, David will be here on January 11th to celebrate, commemorate, intervene in the John A. Macdonald birthday. So help me welcome David Garneau.
So intimidating to be here. You have no idea. Normally I'm a very shy, well not normally, I am a shy person. I normally come with a well-prepared script that I worked on for months. And I don't often in an academic crowd talk about my paintings. So it's an honor to do so, but as I say, intimidating. But I want to begin by acknowledging that I'm a guest here on Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe, and I've heard also Métis territory. I want to honor those ancestors, but also the ancestors that came before that we don't have the names for those people. And also for the people who share this land now, who find meaning here, who are Indigenous and non-Indigenous, and from many other countries. I also want to thank the elders. I want to thank Aaron for inviting me, very much grateful for that. I'm not here in this part of the country very often, and it was nice to meet you, Jan, and elders Betty and Alan. Your words are echoes from every place that I've been, from across Canada to Australia, New Zealand, similar thoughts, similar sentiments. And it's also the future of universities, this kind of talk, this bringing in the metaphysics, not the religious, but the metaphysics, our relationships to all things. This is important, and thinking this way will change everything. That said, my work is not so respectful. But I will do my best. There are a couple of pieces that aspire to this kind of way of thinking. So I'm not here to exhume any of these men. Well, I will be exhuming Riel on Sunday. I'm doing a performance at the John. I'm actually collaborating with the John A. Macdonald sculpture in Regina. And I'll talk about it at the end of this talk. And I'm trying to embody Riel in many ways, many different ways. I think about this character an awful lot. He was a very strange man. In the prairies, he's not so well celebrated as Gabriel Dumont. Gabriel Dumont's the warrior. And it's easy to identify with a guy like that, the warrior. Never wrote anything. Whereas Riel left a legacy of his texts, and they're easy to pick apart. That must have been an academic laugh in here. He leaves this paper trail, and he was a strange character. So in my performance, I'm trying to enact many aspects of his personality. So as I say, I'm not going to really exhume these guys. I'm going to talk about my fascination a little bit with Riel, but also how both men have influenced me in surprising ways. When I talk in Quebec, I always have to apologize. David Garneau does not speak French. Why? Because it's John A. Macdonald. All my failings have to do with that. So we were in the park earlier today with Aaron. Now as a Métis, I read this in two different ways. You know, get real, get Riel, get Riel. Really get me. But it was really encouraging to see that. So I'm not going to belabor the history too much. I think many people are aware of what occurred in terms of the founding of Canada, the creating of Canada, how the Métis were instrumental in shaping Manitoba and then shaping some of the so-called settlement of the plains. I do want to talk a little bit about the Métis imaginary. So who are the Métis people? And I'm going to make this real short, but it is important. So here's one Métis imaginary. I got this from a Métis homeland, or Métis site describing this is the Métis homeland. Incredibly arrogant, right? It's trying to occupy spaces. Probably the First Nations people might have something to say about this. Here's another one I found, Métis in Canada before Confederation. This one's particularly bizarre. Okay, but it's constructed within a particular, well, this is worse. This is an artist, Nicole Trasick, who I don't know. She pulled a line from John Ralston Saul's book, We're All Métis. Okay, now we're stretching it. So what does it mean? This is a recent book by Chris Anderson. I don't know if anyone called a scholar from University of Alberta. And that's a Dave Garneau painting on the cover. So I got an advance copy. The hardcover costs $90. But the soft one comes out pretty quick in January, and it'll be considerably cheaper. But I had to read it thoroughly to see if I could agree with what he's saying. And he takes a more hardcore sense of the capital M Métis being Red River Métis. And it's very conservative. So if your family wasn't having origins, or at least touched the ground in Red River, and then maybe branched out, he considers you not necessarily Métis. Okay, he pushes it a little, there's a couple of sentences later on in one of the late paragraphs where he's talking about how Métis who were politically aligned with Red River Métis, okay, they're Métis too. And the Sault Ste. Marie folks were called maybe proto-Métis. So there's a lot of confusion about what it means. But the idea that all mixed-race people, Indigenous and Europeans, were Métis, let's not consider that. Okay? I'm at least with him as far as that goes. And so what happened was a lot of people, he traces very nicely, considered themselves Métis for the census. Okay? It makes sense. I'm mixed blood and call Métis. But he talks about it more in terms of peoplehood and who claims you. The idea of which community claims you. That's who you are. Even so, that's a political sense. I take a much more liberal view. Though I should say, my family does come from Red River. I'll give you a little graph in a minute. Here's a painting that I made about 4 years ago, talking about what happened on the prairies, and I'd like to use it as an example. This is a wonderful moment in, it's from a map from 67-68, along the LaSalle River near Red River. And the river lots, do people know about the river lot system? You can just throw up your hand if you do. Okay, you saved me lots of time. If you don't know, I'm sorry. But it's the French, French system, though on the prairies we call it the French Métis system. And the river lots allowed everybody to live, have access to the water, farmland, and grazing behind, but all the houses were close together, made sense. And then the rationalist Canadian British system came on of the grid. And this was based, this is a large painting, all my paintings are about 5 by 4 feet. This is a painting from a map of just that moment where it was the map makers weren't sure which way it was going to go. So you had both. But both resistance in 1885 or 1869 and 1885 were around this, the grid system being imposed upon the river lot system. This is Batoche. I'll show you some later ones. So this is my great-grandfather and great-great-grandfather and great-great-grandmother, Eleanor and Laurent Garneau. And Laurent was from the Sault Ste. Marie area. He was Anishinaabe and French, and she was from the Red River area, Scottish and Cree Métis. And so our family, has that proper Anderson type roots, and then he was involved in the 1869 resistance, moved to Edmonton, formally in 1874, and then there's an area of Edmonton still called Garneau to this day. So I grew up with that in mind. There's a map of that. He and all his immediate descendants got script, so that underlines further, he's Métis, it's all right. And this is, so in 1896, he left. I'll tell a story about that, from Edmonton, and moved over to St. Paul de Métis, who's one of the founding families. If you go there, there's a 1967 cool UFO landing pad site, and then a cairn to the Garneau family right in front of it, begging for an art intervention there for sure. And Lac St. Anne is a sacred site for First Nations and Métis people, And we had a cabin just north of there at Lac La Nunn, which is sort of a touchstone for me and my family. We had a cabin there for many years until recently. Here are family members. I grew up knowing about my aunties and Jim Brady. I don't know if people know I saw 1.5 men go around. Oh no, it's in my next slide. I saw it in the room here. And Jim Brady would be my great uncle. And you know, growing up, you don't have racial awareness until one day you look and think, are they white? I did. We had the knowledge growing up. This is my dad on the right. He was an amateur historian. Only in his retirement did he really come up with this giant website where he was calling himself Métis. But whenever that book came out, 81 or 82, I was gifted that book, and it talks about Laurent Garneau, and suddenly this consciousness was starting to arise. But comically, it happened a little late, and I'll tell that story in a second. But his dad, on the right, was an assistant fire chief, and very Indigenous looking. You know, and is he white? So Laurent Garneau, he grew up knowing that he was a founder of Edmonton, but none of the plaques, there were 2 at the time, mentioned Métis history whatsoever. So I didn't grow up with the politicized notion of Métis, just Indian blood. But, so I'm going to talk about my own art. I wanted to be Joe Fafard. I don't know if Joe Fafard is known out here, but he was a local hero, still is. I know him quite well now that I moved to Saskatchewan and I work in the department that he used to work in. And Joe Fafard does parochial figures around town, and I just like that idea. So I did the same thing. This is my first solo show, it was called the Boyle Street Boys. This is from an article in 1980. And I was living in downtown Edmonton. My mom had remarried. My mom was a single parent with 5 kids, and the eldest at 5. Lived in sort of the edge of the inner city, 124th Street area of Edmonton. And she remarried, moved to Calgary. I came back, and I was living in this area and working at a place called the Atonement Home, I'll make reference to a little bit later, which was kind of like a day school for mostly Aboriginal students. And they got better. I'm not going to show these. This is just showing the lineage. But here I was thinking I was an artist, and showing in a native gallery. It just fit in. But I remember a reporter came to document this show in 1980 and said, well, you're Métis. And what does that mean? I'd never heard that word before. What are you talking about? Well, you're a descendant of Laurent Garneau, maybe? Yeah. Well, he's Métis founder of Edmonton. So I had to talk to my dad. I had no idea what she was talking about. Well, you're showing in the native gallery. Oh, is it? Totally oblivious. Oh, I mentioned that I'm going to show you a lot of slides. I'm going to tell some stories, and some I'm just going to pass through. This is a video we made. This is a fellow named Corey Cardinal. When I worked at that Atonement Home, like I said, it was like a day school. I made this piece before the Truth and Reconciliation events have been happening, which I've written a fair bit about. So this is 1999, and it was a video where so the Atonement Home is in downtown Edmonton, run by nuns. It looks like a residential school, boys floor, girls floor, nun floor. And I was at Lac St. Anne, where they also had a camp for the summertime. I was working there, and I worked in the city as well when I was 17 years old. And one of the little kids was from Fort Chip, and he was 5 years old, and he was, I'm going to get choked up if I tell the story, but I'm trying not to. He was 5 years old, and he was swearing all the times, and the nuns were very upset. And so one of the nuns asked me to punish him, and asked me to do so by feeding him a spoonful of black pepper, and I did it. And so 25 years later, I found this young man. 20 years later, I found this young man all I did is I put the camera on him, and I told him that story, and that's it. So I was making the figures. They got better. And even there, this is 1984, this is in the City Hall in Edmonton. The one on the left, or the right, is Jerry Potts, who was a Métis guide. So, while I didn't really own my Métis identity, it was certainly just part of my consciousness. I just didn't think of it in a political way at all. Joan Cardinal Schubert was a mentor of mine. For some reason, took me under her wing early on. She was working at the Nickel Arts Museum when I was a student at the University of Calgary. This is the first Indigenous piece that I've made. It's 38 feet long. There's 2 panels missing. It's called How the West Was, ... It's a big comic book panel trying to explain the settlement of the West. It's too big to photograph properly. Here's a section. So it uses comic books, popular culture, and each page has a different narrative. A lot of my work is appropriative. I'm only going to be talking about the Métis work. I also paint roadkill and landscapes, but not enough time. So here, for instance, there's Grey Owl at the bottom. There's a Norman Rockwell painting. You know, what's this guy doing with a headdress? You know, that's a ceremonial and sacred object. So I put a crown in there, and the little boy says, "What about real live Indians?" And there's just too many good stuff in there. This is Bob Boyer, my other mentor, who just passed right around this time, maybe a month ago, 10 years ago. Very influential to me. This is a painting of he and I when I moved to Regina 16 years ago. He dressed in regalia and he danced powwow. And that's Métis? So what is Métis? And it was interesting, this piece is called cross-dressing or cross-dressing. And so am I dressing up as a cowboy? He's dressing up as an Indian. What is the Métis thing going on here? That was the obsession for a while there. When I asked my grandmother, who was more German than anything else on my dad's side, she said, "Métis? Is that a spring drink?" She absolutely refused. Her husband, who looked so native, it's like, how did you become an assistant fire chief? We're just not going to say anything. You'll notice too that there's a shadow going up here, and he's holding his throat, and that'll come up to one of these stories a little bit later. So I was trying to complexify my thinking about Métis identity a little bit. So this is about 2003. This is just a sheet of paper. It's got the word Métis in charcoal in Comic Sans script, and then I spent an hour or two erasing it. And I was hoping to end up with a white sheet of paper. And the more I rubbed, certainly the surface came off, but I was starting to embed that charcoal into the rag paper. And when I showed this work and a bunch of other paintings in Brandon, Manitoba a while back, one of the Métis elders came up and said, "This was the most profound painting I had ever done." And I said, "Wow, really? It only took an hour?" "Oh no, this tells the story of our whole lives." So I've been thinking about that for a long time. So this idea of resilience, this idea of, well, for me, also recognizing, though I'm Indigenous, though I'm Métis, recognized Indigenous by Canada, I still have white privilege. What does that mean? What does this trace mean? This one's called patrimony. It's much more straightforward. Patrimony is what's passed down from parents to their children. And what was passed down in our family was the threat of hanging and certainly of silencing. So I mentioned Lauren Garneau. Lauren was part of the 1867 or 69 resistance in Red River. He flees with many other Métis people and goes to Edmonton after a while bumming around for about 5 years, finally settles down. And when the 1885 resistance is forming, he's in conversation through letters with Riel and others, and maybe he was supplying them. He ended up being the most wealthy Métis guy on the prairies. Like I said, if you go to Edmonton, there's Garneau this, Garneau that. We don't own any of it. But they kept their script. They weren't disenfranchised of their script. So they became pretty wealthy in St. Paul. And he lived till 1922. But during the resistance, so he's on the south side of the river, where the Métis, there was 85% of the population. He was on the south side, identifying with the French, touching with St. Albert Métis people, and right across the river from the Hudson's Bay Fort. So when violence breaks out, the city fathers or town fathers or the fort fathers say, "Okay, everybody into the fort." And of course the Métis mean us, sir. We're the ones doing the fighting over there, to mean us. And so he refused to go. And a bit of a joker, one of the nights, according to the newspaper of the time, I can't remember the name, says that he and his friends were whooping it up on the other side of the river, shooting the guns in the air, and that the latrines were full that night. Anyways, when things went wrong in Batoche, they came looking for him. And they eventually found him, but it took some time. And he was arrested. Oh, there's his property, Yellow and Hudson's Bay. It's right across the way there. So he was eventually arrested. Actually, there's a wonderful story. I have to tell it quickly because it fits with that erasure. Might as well tell it a bit of a private story, family story. So the family story goes that during the resistance, when it fails, the troops are coming up, the militia's coming to look for Garneau, and his wife gets word of it ahead of time, grabs the letters from Riel, the incriminating letters. She's doing her wash, and she washes them in the, those ripple glass or wooden boards. It's a neat family story, but then it tells you more why that paper is done that way, the erasure. So there's this erasure that is self-done as well. So Chief Papa's Chase, there's Papa's Chase Reserve nearby on the south side of Edmonton as well. Now it's totally industrialized, but the Papa's Chase people are trying to get their land back. I'll show Chief Bruno in a minute. But luckily, he had, Garneau had, I think, 9 kids at that point, 9 or 11, and he was arrested, he was put in jail, he was going to be hung for treason, so that's why that figure goes like this, or has the shadow, the other one has a shadow on his neck, and why the noose is more important to our family. But Papa's Cheo took the family, all the family in so they wouldn't starve because he was in jail. We read from 3 to 6 months, don't know for sure. And at the end of his life, Papa's Cheo was disenfranchised of his land. His band members are spread out and taken up by other bands in the area, Obima and some others. Anyways, he goes and Lawrence Garneau comes and takes him and builds a cabin for him as a reminder or thank you for that friendship. So close relations with the First Nations Papa's Cheo people. Cheryl Rondell, performance artist that I work with a fair bit and will in the future coming up. She's from the Papa's Cheo Reserve, so we have close family ties there. And this is Chief Calvin Bruno, also from, he's a current Papa's Cheo chief. And Cheryl and I are trying to think of it for the last 8 years working on some project, mostly around bridges that have been built across the Saskatchewan River and bones are being found. And so what to do with these things. So I'm going to show you a bunch of work of me working on my Métis identity in, about 14, 13 years ago. So this is a color blindness test, any sight majors, right? If you look at it, it's that crazy 8 on its side though. So if you can see it, right, you can see the Métis flag. So in order to see Métis people, you must discriminate. This is another one. I do a lot of things with nooses. Showed this one up in Fort McMurray like 12 years ago. And this very shy grade 12 Indigenous guy comes up and he says, I love the red power symbol, man. I totally didn't see it. An older guy in Edmonton got this made into a tattoo on his arm and asked for permission. And I don't know what it was. I think it was like handcuffs or something. I don't know what it meant. There's a road between Regina and Prince Albert called the Louis Rail Trail. I thought it was saying Louis Rail Trial, and I was so proud. So these I want to make into a real sign someday, but I haven't. And it's got a Red River card instead of the news. This is my Métis dream catcher. This is supposed to actually have 7 nooses, referring to Aaron to the 7 hung in North Battleford. There's 2 versions. One's in the collection of the Montreal Museum of Arts. This is, John Ralston Saul wanted to buy this painting, but his wife said no. This is Riel's last mugshot, and it's just having a little bit of fun, but it presages what I'm doing now. They bought this painting instead. It looks tame, but it's actually really rich. I've written quite a bit about the ditch in prairie mythology. There's a book just came out called Mind the Gap, and I'm talking about how the ditch is the property's frame. How it's this Foucault type space that's a space and no space, a transit space. But in the prairies where there are more roads than anywhere, southern Saskatchewan has more roads than anywhere else on the planet, and the place is totally cultivated. It's the one place of wildness, and all kinds of interesting things happen there. So this is a autobiographical bush. It's based on Tangled Garden, you know, Macdonald's painting on one hand, but it's a weed. It's an unknown weed. No one knows what this weed is or what it is, but it's taking place over 3 seasons, and it's a bit of an autobiography. So, they've been celebrating Garneau like crazy, thanks to the Francophone folks. Francophones, Sask-Francois and Alberta French are so different from Quebec French people. And a number of them, especially the academics, have aligned themselves with Métis people as kind of, maybe we're all kind of the same. But what it means is that there's a lot of scholarship and historical interest in Métis people. And Laurent Garneau there was a symposium about 6-7 years ago, but also there's all these plaques showing up, and there's Garneau tree, Garneau banners throughout the Garneau. This new one finally mentions Eleanor, you know, a pretty significant character at the time, strong woman, and also makes mention that he was Métis for the first time. Okay. So I'm not really talking about John A. Macdonald, you can tell, but a little bit. What about the hair, right? I'm really interested in seeing less so about the people, the 2 people, than about their construction within imagery, right? So it's very, very interesting. And the statues too. So here's the one that I'm going to be doing a performance on Sunday with. He's very Saskatchewan, right? Closer to the people. Over here, this one's like way up on a pedestal. You can't kiss him or anything. And look at, this is Riel, sculpture of Riel in Winnipeg. And look at the bodies, they're identical. The suits are the same, everything. You notice how the head on the Riel one is too big? It's like they just put it on a John A. sculpture. Sure. So, I'm going to be doing performances, cooperative performance with John A. and I. This one I'm going to do on Sunday with in Regina, and I'm going to come here on the 11th of January to help you with your commemorations. I'm doing one in PA, but they don't have a John A. sculpture, but they got Diefenbaker, and he's pretty interesting. But I'm looking for other sculptures too to have a relationship with, but hopefully they're a little lower down. Actually, John A., it looks deceiving. He's actually, his ear is about 8 feet up, so I'm using a tin can telephone to reach him. I want to talk to him. Okay, here's a neat thing. So I did this about 12 years ago. Walmart was selling these John A. dolls. So this is as close as I get to your project here. And so what you do is you buy a whole lot of them. You open them up. You put a noose in them. Then you put it back on the shelf. Which I did. And I just imagine his response. But I don't really know. So here's some other work from about 12 years ago as I'm working out my identity. So this is Jastro's Duck Rabbit. It's not Jastro's actually. Wittgenstein used it, and it was in a German newspaper or magazine in about 1879, something like that. And so everyone's seen this before, right? But if you see it during Easter time, you're more likely to see a rabbit. In the fall, you're more likely to see a duck. And I thought, well, this is a good symbol. I've been looking for symbols for Métis people, right? I'm actually on a mission, right, from Riel. Riel said, my people will sleep for 100 years, and when they awake, it's the artist who will give them their spirits back. I'm taking that seriously. I don't think he said it, by the way. Any scholars in the room, there doesn't go back before it appeared in 1981 in a certain magazine that this person worked for. And that was, yeah, the New Breed magazine. It was the first time it ever comes up. No one's been able to find it before then. Edward Butraz, very interesting guy. Anyways, I take it seriously. I'm on a mission from Riel. And so I'm trying to use contemporary culture and also, as you'll see later, some Métis culture to try and come up with new images, new metaphors. So this one seemed to be good for a while. Because, well, what would happen? So this is Guy. This is a Métis guy. He's sort of First Nation, kind of white. What is he? Well, what happens, though, is really interesting, was when Duck Rabbit meets Duck. Anyways, interested to learn from, I think it was a woman, Professor Blackstone in the University of Calgary. I think I first read it, but from others, elders as well, I learned that Indigenous maps are so different from colonial maps. In colonial maps, you've got the fort or the whatever in the middle, and all the hostilities in concentric rings going around it. Whereas Indigenous maps, you've got where you are and where you want to go, and all the provisions and things you need to know along the way. I thought that was interesting. I just did that intuitively rather than putting Garneau at the center. So these are beaded, little beaded dots. They're probably pretty hard to see. It was my way of trying to get this play between Indigenous imagery, which is usually flat, often map-like, representational, and the beading, which was particularly Métis, because I'm trying to tease out what would be Métis versus First Nations of the Plains. This is a beaded map of Winnipeg, again, based on a map of Winnipeg and St. Boniface on the other side. And here's those river lots. Edmonton, I wanted to make that other painting because people didn't realize that Edmonton was a Métis settlement. 85% of the folks were Métis at this period. And in 1870, of course, many, many Métis people. So it actually shaped the landscape, which is why it's so terrible to drive downtown Winnipeg. And I was thinking of Alexandria from Cold Lake, Alberta, just north of St. Paul de Métis. And these are often seen as modernist paintings, but they're maps. They're maps. And most people don't know this. He's devastatingly intelligent. Insurance on the Teepee, that's a great title, 1972. Right? The effect of the cash nexus on Indigenous survival. Insurance on the Teepee, it's just one of the all-time great titles. But it's a map. He can tell you when in 2003, he did a talk, or 2004, he did a talk at the Glenbow Art Gallery. He spent about an hour and 45 minutes taking people through. And he was explaining what each of these lakes and river systems meant and where hunting was and so on. So very, very interesting idea. So when I talked to him more recently about it, you know, these being collected by oil companies, we both had work in a Synovus building, and I asked him about it, and he says, well, they don't know what they're buying, you know. These are land claims. They're purchasing land claims. And then later on, we'll be able to reveal the truth. That was awesome. There's the man. This was taken in Banff, I think. And I went to Australia. Bastards. I had no idea. These are their map paintings with dots, just like me. It was devastating. I showed them what I was doing, and they loved it. They thought, yeah, we're all thinking alike. You know, this is St. Madeline. This is a town. There's a nice book called Community Without a Town. This is a Métis settlement that, you know, when the Exodus happened in 1869, they stopped just between the two highways on the Saskatchewan-Manitoba border. A large community, 200 families. In the 1930s, the farmers said, oh, this is all community property, you guys have to go, so they burned them out. Can't really see it, dots again, but there's graves all in the center. And I visited this site. Me and the elders brought me out there, and I wanted to record this place. Oh, and then I saw Christy Belcourt. Shit, again. She's already doing this material culture, taking the beads and turning them into paintings. We've since been friends, but... And these are my vamps. I made for her walk with the sister. So it's a Métis flag broken into 2 tiers. So Christy, she's awesome. So I thought, okay, I can't do that anymore. So I decided to combine that kind of Western approach with the flatness and beaded Métis type beading. So this is the Carleton Trail as it passes through Batoche. This is a small painting, but then I went crazy. So this is 4 directions teaching and the teepee entrance. But I was told by a Cree elder in a sweat that I was in, he wanted me to take photos and do painting of teepees, but the top part only, which shows you the kind of dots. So these paintings are a little bit hard to see, but they have the tops of the teepees, and they've got these motifs. So this one's, the one on the left is at the fiddle camp, and the right one, I think it's just called Composition Red. But for me, this is as close as I get to spiritual work. The teepee is the physical body at the bottom, the clothed body, the body clothed by flesh, and then the nadir reaches up to the metaphysical plane. And I had a profound experience in a sweat lodge right next to this. This was the changing tent that led me to some of these solutions. Particularly around some paintings I was doing of Neil Stonechild, which there's just not enough time to talk about. So then I started introducing animals. These are about 5 by 4 feet. With all these little dots. There's a dragonfly in this one. This is a rib cage turning into a butterfly. Oh, Louis Riel. Louis Riel and Van Gogh have a lot in common. So I was, again, making a lot of work around Batoche, and I was imagining, well, what if the French Impressionists came to Batoche? And they would celebrate, you know, they'd have a whole different take on things. And, you know, Vincent van Gogh was very interested in the downtrodden. Both guys spoke French. Both wrote copiously to their brother, or Theo, Vincent to Theo, and Louis to his sister. They both studied to be priests, and that didn't work out so well. You know, they had a lot in common. Both had mental disabilities or challenges. This guy was a poet, and of course Vincent a painter, and they both met violent ends. So I've done a fair bit of work, and I'm working on a new body of work as well. This is if Monet came to Batoche. This is based on one of his winter scenes. It's kind of hard to see in this image. These are fallen Métis soldiers taken from a very rare photograph. This is Louis David Riel by David Garneau after Napoleon Crossing the Alps by Jacques-Louis David. This is a very large painting. It's 8 feet high by 5 feet wide, and it's based on, of course, Napoleon Crossing the Alps. It looks better though, doesn't it? Really juicy painting. Really excited. This is an Idle de Moor painting, or drawing, I should say. Sorry. And I've been working on Idle de Moor motifs. I've been laboring on this for a year and a half. In all my spare time, I've been making almost no other art. It's not big. It's about 8 feet high and 6 feet across, and it's made up of thousands of, well, hundreds of photographs of thousands of people from the period from November 28th to January 15th, and it started on January 15th. So it's a collage of all those scenes of Idle de Moor and made into a quilt. And it's almost done. I'm about 10 hours away. Other work that I've been working on, I've been working with non-Indigenous artists trying to do this idea of creative conciliation. So this is Apology Guys with Chinese Canadian Clement Gay. I just come up with the ideas, and he's a skilled craftsman. Thank you very much, Clement. And so we performed this one. He did it in Montreal, and I've done it with elders at Algoma University, where the Shinwalk Residential School was. So you roll these dies, and it says, "I am fairly sorry. We are so sorry. We are so tired of this." Most of them say sorry on the other side. One says tired of this. And this is one uncanny woman, and I'm sorry I can't remember this young woman's name. She picked it up, and she was taking it real seriously. These are students who went to, former students who went to Shinwalk Residential School. They're self-organized, very powerful group. And we rolled it a couple times, but they just wanted to tell stories about apology, about conciliation. And this one, she said she was going to channel an uncle, and she rolled it, and for the first time and never since, it landed on its end, which was so freaky. So last little bit here, I'm going to talk about the performance, and then take some questions. So for about 6 years, maybe 7 years, on every November 16th, I will come and put a little noose. This is a big one, but just a little noose either draped over the Johnny Macdonald sculpture's arm or at his feet. And they usually last a few hours, even a couple of days, and then they're removed. And I decided, you know, so like, why do we have a Johnny sculpture in Victoria? You know, it's crazy to think about it. But I've been also thinking about the ditches. Remember I was talking about the ditches there? And what do you see in the ditches but mini monuments, right? Temporary monuments, crosses. You never think this is Christian colonization. But it is, right? You don't see a Star of David in the ditch. There's some Jewish people getting hit by cars, I'm pretty sure. And I've only seen one First Nations medicine wheel, which I thought was brilliant. So if that ever happens, put those there instead. So, of course, it's a form of colonization. It's a reminder of conquest to have that sculpture there. So I thought I'm going to do a performance where I was dressed as Riel. I had 2 costumes made. One is this felt costume to play on Joseph Boys and also in the fur trade and felting. And then the other one is one of those kind of mechanical ones you see in New York. And I'll probably do that. What I'm going to do is I'm going to wait at the airport and have these little nooses, 100 little nooses made that have tags called souvenir from Regina. So I'm passing out at the airport because that's where he was hung in Regina. But I've decided that I'm going to have a conversation with the statue. It's sort of a collaborative thing. But I had written a monologue, written a script, and decided that in Regina anyways, people know enough about Métis and First Nations issues. There's a pretty good population there. It's all going to be mute. I won't describe the whole thing, but I'm just in the felt version instead of the more comic version. And he's going to do about a half-hour of actions. There's drumming. There's the coat turns into a teepee. It's going to become a cleansing ceremony, a number of things. But mostly it's a confrontation with colonialism and then turn its back and go to a Métis First Nations discourse alone. So these are just some photographs from that. And this is a painting I did a while ago. So I'm going to leave it there and take some questions. Credit for me. My name's on there because he came to buy one of those paintings, and the first time I met him, he was at Moose Jaw. He and his wife, she was doing something for Corner Gas, and so he was hanging around the gallery and killing time. We got a really good conversation. So when she was done being the position she was in, he came out and said, you know, I'm coming to Regina, and can I come to your studio? I said, oh yeah, sure. Well, the first time he had, bodyguards and the big black vehicles and so on. It was awesome. This time I had to pick him up my old theater. And so, I brought him in there. I did my song and dance really quick. And he said at one point, I think you're trying to get rid of me. I said, well, you have a lot of time. You don't have a lot of time. No, I got time to kill. So we talked for a good long time. And this was one of the main topics. And I couldn't really digest where he was going. But what his concept is that Canadians are not British or French or Europeans really, right? They're sort of those things, but sort of Indians, right? Not really, but sort of, okay? Now this has been a dream of white people in North America for a long time. I don't know if he was part of the Boy Scout movement, but that's where it was instilled in me. Right? So you're not really European. It's like European, but with all the bad stuff removed and replaced with good stuff coming from Indigenous people. Now, in theory, I think that's a really good idea, right? If you just took the good stuff from both places and put it together, that makes sense. But Métis people kind of think that Métis are something else and maybe have rights around land and things like this as well. So that's how I nuance it. I thought you were going to pick a fight about whether there's an accent over the E or not.
So just peeking at Erin's notes that she was just taking, we would like to know if you can talk about the role of using appropriative imagery to discuss Indigenous histories and projects.
Yeah, that's a really good question. So often, not so much anymore, but often I was asked about can non-Indigenous people appropriate Indigenous things? And I mean, if Indigenous folks can appropriate white things, why can't it go both ways? And so my first argument would be that Indigenous people are always and already bicultural, in the sense that we have to learn both systems. Unfortunately, many of us only know the European white Canadian system, or know that better, and we have to struggle to learn other ways of knowing from Métis, First Nations, whatever. Whereas, if if you show me a non-Indigenous person who was raised similarly, biculturally, like really did experience themselves differently, I think that we'd have to give them license to do those sort of things. It's like white guys with dreads. Sometimes it's not bad, right? Or people wearing Tibetan gear. Sometimes it's not horrible. They're not pretending to be Tibetan, right? But they're still showing an affiliation. But it's so touchy, right? To me, if you're going to borrow somebody else's stuff, hopefully you're going to talk with them about it. That's probably part of it. Elders that I know on the prairies, particularly when talking about their wisdom, they say, this is not just for us. It's for everybody. And speaking of Tibetans, I have this really good story. I'm trying to remember his name, Sabtine. He's one of the Dalai Lama's emissaries. And he comes to Regina now and then, about every 5 years, and they do the sand mandala. But one of the first times he came out, he went and met with elders, I think it was at Payapot or one of these reserves, and I asked him, why would you do that? He says, well, what we've been instructed to do is we come to a community and we go to the Indigenous elders, the places there, and then we compare notes. And if we disagree with something, then it's cultural. If we agree, then maybe it's true. And so I think that when people come with respect, if they're borrowing something, I should say, if you're using something rather than exploiting something, then it's usually in a dialogue and there's going to be respect there. But there's a lot of nuances to when that actually happens. I hope I answered that reasonably well.
I'm really interested in your news around the statute. Here in Kingston, it's almost sacrilegious that we talk against sojourning, especially in the non-Indigenous population. How is that taken with the non-Indigenous population in Regina? Do they look upon that as sacrilegious, disrespectful, or how do they take that?
I'll find out on Sunday.
But you see you drew.
Yeah, but I don't think that made anybody's consciousness. I don't think people think about that statute so much. So by this action, I want people to think about the absence of Riel and the absence of Métis. I was just doing a news interview before coming here on the phone, and I was talking about when I lived in Calgary, there's Shaganaki Trail, there's all these Indigenous names all over the city. Edmonton's not as good, but still quite well. But the Blackfoot and the settlers in Calgary actually had a very good relationship, even when things were sour, when you weren't allowed to wear power over Bailey. The Stampede, they still had Indian village that whole time, even though it was against the law. So there's some interesting relationships there. You come to Regina, there's only 5 or maybe 6 street names that are named for Indigenous anything. It's very much erased. So why is John A there? That's a colonial gesture, of course. That's the Victor standing there in Victoria Square Park. So by bringing Riel's presence, it's actually not about Riel. It's about John A's being there. Why is John A there? So that's what I'm feeling there. But I don't know how to respond. But I feel that there's enough people that'll know the kinds of visual metaphors I'm using, that I'm not going to speak there. But being here and seeing that sculpture, I feel like it's going to be, when I come here, it'll be a monologue of some sort. I don't think I can do a pantomime, because it won't be understood. So it might be more confrontational, but I don't know. I want to be respectful of this place. So
I'm going to make a statement and ask you for a response. I was a conservation officer for many years. I was doing surveillance, and one day I watched a lady, and I had a little 3-year-old boy walking down the side of the road, and they stopped. And I think this lady stopped to light a cigarette. This little boy looks down, and he sees an anthill. He was just amazed. And the mother took a look, didn't see anything, and brought him away. And that's what I see happening. There's so many people that don't want to recognize that there is differences. There's problems.
There's a girl, young woman, I was at the Alberta College of Art and Design where I used to teach. Maybe 3 years ago I was doing a talk, and she told me the story that she was coming back from hiking. She's maybe 19, 20. She's coming back from hiking. And what she didn't know, but it was probably the Stony Reserve coming down through the mountain. And suddenly she came across a Sundance, what was left over, the power of Sundance. And she didn't know what she was looking at. She was overwhelmed. What is this? And suddenly aware, non-Indigenous person, suddenly aware there's this whole other set of civilizations right beside us. Now, whether you're talking about the animal worlds or Indigenous worlds, it's right there. It's stunning. Or you go into Banff and see that the beautiful bridge and stonework there was made by World War I interned prisoners, you know. What is it, Ukrainians, and I forgot who else was all interned at that time. So there's all these worlds that are hidden to us. But she felt a profound sense of betrayal, that the education system and her parents had betrayed her. That there was something there, not just different and alien, but useful. Very interesting. So when I talk about truth and reconciliation, I don't use that word. Fact and conciliation. There's facts there, there's information. Truths are just one person's truth. You know, tell us your truth. That's their slogan, right? Baloney. Conciliation is a relationship between two equal partners. Reconciliation assumes that you already had a conciliation event, fell apart, and you're reconciling. We didn't have that. Métis people, for instance, didn't have treaty. What does it mean to live in conciliation? It means to be a good neighbor. What does it mean to be in conciliation if you come from another country and you have this adopted burden? You have to be aware of these histories that you are now part of. To me, that's a more formative dialogue, this conciliation idea. And it extends, as you're hinting, with the natural world, which is our world, versus the artificial world. A thought, anyways.
There's a question here, David.
Yeah.
Yeah, I just wanted to read a quote and then just get your comment on it. This was actually from a local paper here. Yeah. November 4 article. It's examining Sir John May's legacy. Yeah. The quote is by David Hackett Fisher. It's from his book, Chaplain's Dream. And this is the quote I'd like you to comment on. 2 generations ago, historians wrote of European saints and Indian savages. In the last generation, too many scholars have been writing about Indian saints and European savages. The opportunity for our generation is to go beyond the calculus of saints and savages altogether.
Okay. I'm not good at calculus, but I'll give it my best shot. So, the article I wrote for one of the last years of Fuse magazine, talking about the fiction of Europe. Okay, so, anybody who's here, second generation, say Italian, and you go back to Italy, it's not the Italy of your parents, the one they told you about. It's not like that. The England that you're told about, or Western civilization, it's a fiction, it's a set of stories, a set of beliefs, and so on. This is important. So, when people are talking about Indigenous anything, yeah, there's an attempt to romanticize at this point. Okay? It makes some sense. But just as they're incredibly irrational people in Europe, and including the formation of European philosophy, they're incredibly irrational Indigenous people. Right? Indigenous people aren't all saints, of course. There's all kinds of terrible practices in terms of on the prairies of burning and all kinds of things. Cannibalism in different places, all this stuff. How do we sort this out? I don't want to be John Cleese or whatnot. But we stand, particularly as Métis, we stand in between, trying to figure it out. I don't have any more wisdom than that. In terms of sort of the backlash of conservative thinkers and academics, until you've really appropriated in the positive sense, not misappropriated, that's a different, but appropriated Indigenous knowledge, Indigenous histories, Canadian histories, you can't really say you understand what Indigenous is to reject it. I don't know if that was clear.
Thank you.
All right.
I have a question, if that's okay.
Aaron.
So you're about to do a performance, and we've talked a little bit about performance art as an intervention. I was wondering if maybe you could speak to the power of kind of bringing your own body into the space of Kingston in January, and how you feel like that might complicate the conversation that we're having here?
Yeah. So I teach and I curate and I write and I do lectures and all that stuff. But I found that in my practice there's been a very great lack in terms of presenting an embodied practice. And by that I mean I look at Rebecca Belmore's work, Adrian Stimson, Terrence Wool, Maria Hupfield, all these incredible Indigenous performance artists. And the way they theorize their performance in the body is extra-rational, let's say, instead of irrational. Extra-rational. And that they have a profound sense of being in this space in that moment, planning ahead, of course, but being open to what might happen. And I'm really interested to see what's going to happen on Sunday or what's going to happen on January 11th. Plan as best I can, but try and have a truly performative embodied practice in which the way it's been constructed within European history and Métis and some First Nations knowledge will come out in what I hope will be an authentic way. And I'm scared shitless. That's why I'm glad to have come out and do a little scouting ahead of time, and hopefully folks will tell me what might happen. I have no idea, but I have this feeling again that even though I'm coming sort of in this guise of Riel, it's not about Riel, it's about how we construct Riel and how we construct John A. and why we need John A. now, or here. Why we might need Riel here. I'm interested in Riel because he was a bit of an intellectual rather than the more militaristic of Gabriel Dumont, and I'm not really into warrior culture that way. But I'm interested in seeing what dynamic will happen in a dialogue. I don't know what John A. has to tell me yet.
Thank you so much, David. So we'd like to say thank you to David for coming, and we're going to be having another performance shortly, so maybe we'll just take a quick 5-minute break. But we just like to say thank you so much, David, for coming.